Imagine being born with all the privileges of a firstborn, inheritance of the name, leadership, and honor, only to lose it all because of a single wrong choice. This is the story of Reuben, the first son of Jacob and Leah, a man who began with great promise but whose destiny took an unexpected turn. In the Bible, the tribe of Reuben carries the consequences of this loss. They could have been significant, but they ended up in the background. Who was Reuben? Why did his tribe have such a different fate from the others? And what does this story teach us about choices, repentance, and God's plan? The history of the tribe of Reuben is filled with surprises and lessons that still resonate today. In this video, we will explore this account and understand what happened to Jacob's firstborn and his descendants. It all began with an escape. Jacob, grandson of Abraham, had to leave his home in a hurry because his brother Esau was consumed by anger and sought revenge. In the midst of this uncertain journey, he found refuge in the house of his uncle Laban. It was there that his eyes met those of Rachel, a young woman of singular beauty, with delicate features and a captivating presence that enchanted everyone. For Jacob, there was no doubt, she was the one his heart longed for. Determined to marry her, Jacob proposed a deal to Laban. He would work for 7 years as payment for the right to wed Rachel. Time passed, but the love he felt for her made each day light, as if the years were mere moments. Then finally, the great day arrived. The celebration was magnificent, filled with music, dancing, and joy. But the next morning, upon waking, Jacob was struck by a devastating shock. At his side was not Rachel, but Leah, the older sister. Betrayed, Jacob ran to Laban, seeking an explanation. But his uncle's response was direct. In his land, the eldest daughter had to marry before the youngest. The marriage had already been consummated, and nothing could be done. However, Laban presented him with a new offer. If Jacob worked for another 7 years, he could also marry Rachel. And so, driven by deep love, he accepted. Now Jacob had 2 wives. But while his heart beat for Rachel, Leah lived in the shadow of that passion. She noticed Jacob's distant gaze, the silence that stretched between them, the nights when, despite being married, loneliness was her only companion. Deep down, all Leah wanted was to be seen, to be loved, to feel valued. But her husband's love already had an owner. However, God saw what human eyes ignored. He saw every silent tear of Leah, every hidden pain in her heart. With mercy, he decided to honor her in a special way. While Rachel remained childless, Leah was granted an unexpected blessing. She conceived and gave birth to a son. At that time, having children was the greatest gift a woman could receive. But for Leah, that baby meant much more than that. As she held her son for the first time, she felt joy, hope, and a deep longing that perhaps now Jacob would look at her differently. Perhaps, at last, she had found a way to be loved. Leah chose a meaningful name for her son, Reuben. The name carried a silent cry, a deep desire to be noticed. "Look, a son!" It was as if she were saying, "Jacob, look at me. See the son I have given you. Now, perhaps, you will love me." But despite the blessing that Reuben represented, Jacob's heart remained the same. His love for Rachel did not change, and Leah's hope faded in the cold silence of a gaze that never chose her. Even so, God was by her side. Her story was not yet over. The birth of Reuben was not just a family milestone. Without Leah knowing, that boy would begin a grand lineage. He would become the leader of the tribe of Reuben, the first of the 12 tribes of Israel. His name would be remembered throughout generations, and his existence would be linked to the fulfillment of the divine promises made to Jacob. But along with this honor, there would also come challenges, mistakes, and lessons that would shape the destiny of his descendants. Time passed, and Reuben grew as Jacob's firstborn, carrying the expectation of becoming the future leader of the family. As the eldest, it was natural that he would inherit the position of prominence, the greatest portion of the blessing, and responsibility over his brothers. However, the reality within that household was very different. The rivalry between Leah and Rachel was reflected in their children. Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, was not just another among the brothers. He was Jacob's favorite. His father treated him in a special way, surrounding him with attention and gifts, which stirred envy and resentment among the other sons. Reuben, as the eldest, felt this tension even more intensely. He wanted his father's respect. He wanted to be recognized as the natural leader of the family, but he realized, day after day, that Jacob's heart was set on Joseph. The weight of this rejection followed him, shaping his choices and leaving marks that time would never erase. It was in the midst of this family rivalry, where disputes and resentments grew each day, that Reuben made an unthinkable decision, a mistake that would forever change the course of his life. In an impulsive act, he lay with Bilhah, one of his father Jacob's concubines. Bilhah was not just a servant, but also the mother of two of his brothers and one of his father's wives. In the culture of that time, this act carried a meaning far beyond betrayal. By taking a leader's concubine, it was as if Reuben were claiming a position of power for himself, trying to assert that he deserved to be the head of the family. However, instead of being recognized as someone worthy of leadership, he was seen as disrespectful and unworthy. This mistake would have irreversible consequences. The Bible briefly mentions the event in Genesis chapter 35, verse 22, but its implications were profound. Jacob discovered what Reuben had done, and although he did not say anything immediately, he kept that betrayal in his heart. The firstborn, the one who was supposed to be an example for his brothers, had dishonored his own family, and because of this, he would lose the right that had once been his by birth. The years passed, and Jacob, now elderly, felt that his time was coming to an end. He gathered all his sons to give them a final blessing, a sacred and decisive moment, for a father's words on such an occasion determined the future of his descendants. For Reuben, this could have been the long-awaited moment, the chance for redemption, the opportunity to receive a word of restoration. Perhaps, deep down, he still longed for his father's recognition. But Jacob's words were as harsh as a precise blow. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength and the first sign of my vigor, the most excellent in honor and power. But you are as unstable as water, and therefore you will not be the most excellent, for you defiled your father's bed." Genesis chapter 49, verses 3 and 4. Each phrase was like an open wound in Reuben's heart. In a single moment, his father stripped him of what he desired most, the position of leadership. The title of firstborn no longer belonged to him. Jacob called him unstable as water, someone without firmness, without self-control, incapable of carrying the responsibility that a leader should have. But Reuben's humiliation did not end there. The right of leadership and the double portion of inheritance which traditionally belonged to the firstborn were given to Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. With this, Jacob's preference for Joseph, which had always been evident, was now definitively established. What Reuben feared most had happened. He was replaced. The years passed, and his descendants multiplied. Although the birthright had been taken from their patriarch, the tribe of Reuben grew and became strong, establishing itself as a significant part of the people of Israel. During the years of slavery in Egypt, the Reubenites suffered alongside the other Israelites, enduring the burden of servitude and crying out for freedom. But when God sent Moses as a deliverer, they were among those who witnessed the great miracles. They saw the 10 plagues that struck Egypt, crossed the Red Sea as if it were dry land, and ate the manna that God sent from heaven every day. However, their journey was far from over. The path to the Promised Land would be marked by challenges, and the people of Israel would have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the generation that had left Egypt perished, making way for a new generation, stronger and more faithful, who would take possession of the inheritance promised to their ancestors. When the time came to organize the people for the conquest of Canaan, God commanded a census to be taken, recorded in Numbers chapter 1, verses 20 to 21. The tribe of Reuben was counted and numbered, more than 46,000 warriors ready for battle. This demonstrated that, even without the birthright, the Reubenites remained a powerful and essential tribe for the future of Israel. But when they approached the Promised Land, something unexpected happened. The tribe of Reuben, along with the tribe of Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh, began to observe the lands east of the Jordan River. It was a fertile region with vast pastures, perfect for raising livestock. The leaders of these tribes saw an opportunity in that land and began to consider a different path from the rest of the tribes. while the other tribes were preparing to cross the Jordan River and take possession of Canaan. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh chose a different course. They approached Moses with an unexpected request. They wanted to settle in the lands east of the Jordan without crossing into the Promised Land. This request is recorded in Numbers chapter 32, verses 1 and 5. They said to Moses, "If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as our inheritance. Do not make us cross the Jordan." The request took Moses by surprise. He was immediately concerned. Were these men trying to avoid battle? Were they rejecting the land that God had promised to the people of Israel? The memory of the rebellion of the spies 40 years earlier came back to his mind. At that time, the Israelites had refused to enter Canaan out of fear of their enemies, and because of this, they were condemned to wander in the wilderness until that entire generation perished. With firmness, Moses rebuked them. "Why are you discouraging the Israelites from entering the land that the Lord has given them? If you do this, the wrath of God will burn against you, and he will make Israel wander for another 40 years in the wilderness." Numbers chapter 32, verses 6 and 15. The leaders of the tribes realized that Moses had misunderstood their intentions. They were not trying to avoid the fight, nor were they doubting God's promise. So they made a new proposal. They were willing to take up arms and fight alongside their brothers. Not only that, but they committed to going to the front lines of the battles, ensuring that the entire Promised Land was conquered before returning to their families on the eastern side of the Jordan. In response to this declaration of commitment, Moses accepted the proposal, but made one condition clear. "If you cross the Jordan armed and fight until the Lord has defeated all the enemies, then you may return and take possession of this land. But if you do not fulfill what you have promised, you will have sinned against God, and be sure that your sin will find you out." Numbers chapter 32, verses 20 and 23. The agreement was sealed. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh received the land they so desired, but before they could enjoy it, they had a great commitment to fight alongside their brothers until the entire promise of God was fulfilled. The tribe of Reuben, along with the tribe of Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh, kept their word. They fought bravely alongside their brothers in the conquest of Canaan, ensuring that the promised land was taken before returning to their lands east of the Jordan River. When the battles finally ended and the Israelites settled, the Reubenites returned to their cities, certain that they had made the best choice. The region they had chosen was fertile and spacious, ideal for their livestock. There they could grow, prosper, and live in peace. For a time, everything seemed to be going well. But there was one detail that at first went unnoticed: the distance from the religious center of Israel. While the other tribes lived near Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept and where the priests offered sacrifices to the Lord, the Reubenites were separated by the Jordan River. At first, this seemed insignificant. After all, they were still part of the chosen people, still Israelites. But over time, this separation began to have consequences. At first, the tribe of Reuben tried to maintain their faithfulness to God. To ensure that they would never be forgotten by the other Israelites and to reaffirm their identity as part of God's people, they built a large altar near the Jordan River. But this decision led to a great misunderstanding. When the other tribes heard about the construction of the altar, they were alarmed. They thought that Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were turning away from the true faith and creating a new form of worship. The fear of a spiritual rebellion spread quickly, and the people of Israel prepared for a civil war against their own brothers. Joshua chapter 22, verses 10 to 34. However, before the conflict could take place, the Reubenites explained their true intention. The altar was not meant for sacrifices or a new worship system. It was a memorial, a symbol to remind future generations that, despite the distance, they still belonged to God's people. Upon hearing this explanation, the other tribes calmed down and the conflict was avoided. But this episode revealed a greater concern. The tribe of Reuben was beginning to feel the burden of separation. They were far from the spiritual heart of Israel, and without realizing it, this distance could change the course of their history. As the years passed, the distance had profound consequences. Far from the priests, the temple, and the festivals that kept the people united in faith, the tribe of Reuben began to drift spiritually. Little by little, they started to lose their identity as part of God's people. That tribe, which once carried great expectations and promises, began to lose its strength. Since they had chosen to live on the other side of the Jordan, separated from the religious and political heart of Israel, the separation was no longer just geographical. Gradually, they became an isolated tribe, both spiritually and culturally. In the beginning, the changes seemed small, some influences from neighboring peoples, different customs here and there. But over time, the Reubenites began to blend more and more with the surrounding pagan nations. Instead of being an influence on other peoples, teaching the commandments of the Lord, they started adopting the same idolatrous practices. The worship of the true God was gradually replaced by foreign rituals and gods that could do nothing for them. The Bible records in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 25, that the Reubenites prostituted themselves by following the gods of the peoples of the land. In other words, they abandoned their faith in the Lord and fully surrendered to idolatry. And the history of Israel showed a clear pattern. Whenever the people turned away from God, inevitable consequences followed soon after. Even in the face of this rebellion, God, in His mercy, did not abandon them immediately. He sent prophets to warn them, calling them to repentance, warning them about what would happen if they continued down that path. But the Reubenites, like so many other tribes, ignored the warnings. They continued living as if nothing could happen to them, trusting in their own political alliances and in the strength of neighboring armies. Meanwhile, a new empire was rising rapidly. Assyria. Known for their brutality and military dominance, the Assyrians advanced, conquering entire nations. No people could withstand their power. When they attacked, they left no survivors. They took the defeated into exile and completely destroyed their lands. And then, the worst happened. Because they were in a more vulnerable geographical position, the Reubenites were among the first to be attacked. Their isolation, which once seemed like an advantage, now became their ruin. They were about to face the darkest moment in their history. The Bible reveals in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 26, that God allowed Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, to march against the tribes living east of the Jordan, including Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Without the strength to resist, they were quickly defeated and taken as prisoners to distant lands. They were torn from the land that God had given to their ancestors and scattered among foreigners, far from the promise, far from their identity. And so, Jacob's prophecy was completely fulfilled. Unstable as water, you will not be first. Genesis chapter 49, verse 4. Reuben should have been the leader among his brothers, the one to carry the birthright and the blessing. However, his instability, lack of firmness, and separation from God led his descendants to ruin. What was once a strong and numerous tribe with a promising future became irrelevant. Little by little, the tribe of Reuben disappeared from history. This tragic journey teaches us a powerful lesson about the consequences of turning away from God. They traded the promise for comfort. When they chose to stay on the other side of the Jordan, they were thinking about what was best for their livestock, not what was best for their faith. It seemed like a good choice at first, but it distanced them from the spiritual center of Israel. They underestimated the influence of sin. At first, they only lived among the neighboring peoples, but little by little they began following their customs, worshipping their gods, and abandoning the Lord's commandments. By the time they realized it, they were completely blended into pagan nations. They ignored God's warnings. Even when the Lord sent prophets to call them to repentance, they refused to listen. They continued living as if nothing could happen to them, trusting in themselves until destruction arrived. Turning away from God does not happen all at once. It begins with small compromises, small wrong decisions that seem harmless. But over time they create a gap that separates us from the Lord's presence. The story of the tribe of Reuben is a warning. Many start well, but little by little they stray, thinking that small mistakes will not have serious consequences. However, every wrong choice has a price, and if we do not return to God in time, we can lose everything He has prepared for us. Reuben was supposed to be the most important tribe in Israel. Instead, it disappeared. May this story teach us to remain faithful, so that our lives do not become like unstable waters, losing their strength and vanishing over time. Now, write in the comments, did you already know this story? What lesson did this teach your heart? Share this message, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.